true birds existed for about half the time that dinosaurs were alive. So, um, I mean, they definitely did evolve from dinosaurs in the sense that their ancestors were dinosaurs. But I'm going to try to break a lot of preconceptions you probably have uh, tonight. And so I want to talk about how dinosaur-like birds are and also how bird-like dinosaurs were. And let's just get going.
She's already
Oh, I
started.
always have to figure out how to do this the first time. Come on, go down. There we go. So I'm going to start off by talking about what makes a bird, or what distinguishes birds from other living vertebrates. And I have quite a list here. And some of them, the first ones are going to be in small, regular sentence font. And that means that they're 95% true, not 100% true. And then the last couple are in caps, and those are the ones that are 100%, no exceptions, true. So, what distinguishes birds from other living vertebrates? The first thing is wings. I mean, birds have wings. However, bats also have wings, so you can find an exception. Though bat wings, as I'll show you, are very, very different than bird wings. So you could say 100% of the time that only birds have bird-like wings. Bird wings, as I'm sure most of you know, basically have their arm bones at the leading ledge, and then it's trailed by stiff feathers that are going to provide the lift. That's the structure of bird wings. On the other hand, the other two well-known flying vertebrates had very different wings. So pterosaurs or pterodactyls, which were not dinosaurs but lived at the same time as dinosaurs, what they had was an incredibly elongated pinky finger and then a leathery membrane that stretched from that pinky finger to their ankles. And bats, with the exception that's still alive, vertebrates that have wings, they have this same kind of a leathery membrane, but it's attached to all of their fingers. So they do have wings, but they're analogous to bird wings. And again, almost no, I mean, that's it. Those are the exceptions I can think of. Second trait that distinguishes birds from other living vertebrates is that birds have hard, toothless beaks. Again, that is true the vast majority of the time, but I like to be very precise. So I should tell you that turtles also have hard, toothless beaks. So we have an exception that way. And it's also true that there are a few birds that do not have complete hard, toothless beaks. This is a turkey vulture, and you can see while it has a hard, toothless beak at the tip of its face, it's also got a fleshy, soft part of its jaw as well. This is actually very characteristic of dinosaurs. So again, I'd say that's 95% true. Third trait is that birds have hollow bones. Birds have hollow bones because the driving force behind the evolution of birds is that they needed to get lighter so that they could fly. And so hollow bones are a lot lighter than solid bones. And so if you just want to see what I'm talking about, if you look at a human leg bone here, it's got a very thick wall and then it's filled with, I cannot believe I am blanking on the word, marrow. If you compare that to an eagle leg bone, you can see that the wall itself is much thinner, though it's actually denser than mammalian bone, and it's got these struts, but there's mostly empty air in here, and that's much, 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 much lighter. Now, I do want to point out again that it's not 100% true, only 95% true, because there are, first off, all birds have some bones that aren't hollow. Okay. But there are some birds that have no hollow bones. So kiwis, penguins, ostriches have no hollow bones at all. But in the main, birds have hollow bones and other vertebrates do not. Another difference, 95% true, is that birds lay calciferous eggs. Just think chicken egg and you know what I'm talking about. So, of course, very, very different than frog eggs, which are soft and jelly-like, or salamander eggs, but also very different than snake and lizard eggs. So on the left, we've got white-cheeked terns hatching, and on the right is some sort of python. I forgot to look up the species. So, again, you're all familiar with chicken eggs, and you know that chicken eggs actually have an inner membrane. It's the bane of us when we're trying to peel hard-boiled eggs, and then this crunchy, hard, chalk-like shell. If you've ever picked up a lizard or a snake egg, you know that it feels more like your leather purse. It is leathery, it's soft. You can see that it deforms rather than cracks. So they do not have eggs, anything like bird eggs. The one exception, and it's again not even 100% an exception, are alligators and crocodiles. The crocodilians, they actually have a three-layer egg. So they have that same kind of inner membrane that again is our bane when we're peeling hard-boiled eggs. Then they've got a middle layer that's leathery, and then they've got a calcified third layer on the top. So they do have calciferous eggs, but not the same as bird eggs. Now we get to the two traits that are 100%, there's absolutely no exceptions that I know of that distinguish birds from other living vertebrates. And the first one I call the amazing two-way lung. And if you think about it, birds have an incredible need to take in oxygen efficiently. First off, they fly high up in the air where the air is thin. Flying takes a lot of energy. I mean, the birds that fly for thousands and thousands of miles without stopping, you've got to be really good at taking in oxygen so you can burn energy. So if you think about us breathing, think about yourself breathing. You breathe in and you take oxygen into your lungs, you take air into your lungs. The oxygen is removed, and then you breathe out carbon dioxide. So you're only getting a shot of oxygen on the inhalation, not the exhalation. But birds have a really clever system. That's why I call it the amazing two-way lung, because when they breathe in, they take air into their lungs, but some of the air goes back into air sacs that are not made of lung tissue. So these air sacs, they're like balloons. They store the air, but they don't absorb oxygen from it. So when they breathe in, they get oxygen in their lungs. But then when they breathe out, the air that's in the balloons goes back into the lungs and they get another dose of oxygen. So birds take in oxygen both when they inhale and when they exhale, which is really efficient. It's really amazing. And there are no other vertebrates, living vertebrates, that do that. And then finally, feathers. And this again is 100% true. If you see a living organism that has feathers, it is a bird. I mean, you don't have to think past that. It is a bird. Though I do want to point out that birds also have scales. Certainly on their feet, this is a bald eagle foot. And notice birds actually have two different types of scales on their feet. They have these flat scales, which are reminiscent of snake scales, actually. And then they've got these pebbly scales, which you will hear is more reminiscent of dinosaur scales. But birds do retain some scales. Here's another example. This is a black vulture, and you can see the scales on its head. So birds certainly have feathers, but they also have scales. So I hope what I've done is prove to you, or tried to convince you, that birds really are distinct and different than other living vertebrates. So let's do the same exercise with dinosaurs. What distinguishes birds from dinosaurs? Wings. Well, there were at least 50 species of dinosaurs that had wings. So a lot of dinosaurs had wings. Hard toothless beak. Hundreds of species of dinosaurs had hard toothless beaks. Hollow bones. Huge numbers of, I don't have a number, huge numbers of dinosaurs had hollow bones, including some, as I'll show you, that you'll be shocked had hollow bones. Calciferous eggs. Until very recently, it was considered a necessary feature of an early reptile. To be called a dinosaur, it had to have calciferous eggs. Virtually all dinosaurs had calciferous eggs. The only exceptions were the very, 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 very first ones. They did not, but once dinosaurs got established, 100% had calciferous eggs. Two-way lungs? Yes, lots and lots and lots and lots of dinosaurs had two-way lungs. And feathers, hundreds and hundreds of species of dinosaurs had feathers. Let me show you some illustrations of some of this. This is a model of a stegosaurus, not a dinosaur you might think seems very bird-like to you, but note, it has a partial hard beak with no teeth. Their only teeth are in the back of their mouths. Even the sauropods, the Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, Diplodocus kind of dinosaurs, had beaks. Now, in the case of the sauropods, they had teeth under their beaks, At least some of them did, some of them didn't, but often their faces ended in a hard shell too, though they usually a hard beak too, though they usually had some teeth. Um, Feathers. Joaquin told you that I got my love of dinosaurs wandering around the American Museum of Natural History. And about 5 years ago now, they shut their dinosaur hall for, I think it was 2 years, when they completely redid it. And the first thing you see when you walk in now is this T-Rex, and look, they covered it with feathers. And so, that's pretty credible that there are a lot of paleontologists that think that feathers were very, very widespread among dinosaurs. Here's a baby T-Rex with downy feathers, much cuter than his mama. And just to show you, it's not just the American Museum of Natural History. This is a raptor in blah, 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 blah. Sorry, not talking well. It is a theropod. Let's just call it a theropod, a dinosaur from the that's installed, a model in the Austrian National Museum, and you can see that they've made it feathered as well. Calciferous eggs. It's really hard to tell from this fossil, but this is a hadrosaur egg, a duck-billed dinosaur egg, and it's got this hard calciferous layer on it that you can see. I said I would tell you about some dinosaurs that had hollow bones that might really surprise you. Again, sauropods, the big Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus-like dinosaurs, had hollow bones. In fact, it's what let them grow so large. Before they evolved hollow bones, they were small. You couldn't design a system that big. I mean, some of these guys are 100 feet long. There's no way to biomechanically do it if they would be as heavy as they would be if their bones were solid. So it's actually what allowed sauropods to get as big as they were. So even sauropods had hollow bones. But to kind of sum this all up, I mean, if you look at the six traits we just talked about, basically we're 0 for 6 with other living vertebrates, and we're 6 for 6 with dinosaurs. Yes, birds really are dinosaurs. They're just the dinosaurs that we have today. And I know that still for a lot of people that seems hard to understand, but I think it's going to become clearer and clearer as I keep talking why I can say that birds really are dinosaurs. Well, if we're going to talk about the question of are birds really dinosaurs, we have to talk about what the heck is a dinosaur anyway. And a lot of people think that the word dinosaur refers to any old reptile that lived a long time ago, but it's not true. Dinosaurs are a specific order of reptiles. An order would be something like penguins or primates or pigeons. I mean, it's a related group of reptiles, so it's not just any old. They evolved about 240 million years ago. But when they evolved for the first 40 million years till the end of the Triassic, they were very small, they were very unimpressive, they were not the dominant animals. The dominant animals were crocodilians, crocodile-like animals or relatives, and the reptiles that were the precursors of mammals. So it took 40 million years and a mini extinction for dinosaurs to take over. The non-avian dinosaurs died out at the end of the Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago. So they lived for 175 million years. They were a phenomenally successful group of animals, and they were dominant, for 135 million years all over the world. They were the biggest, largest, most numerous vertebrates that you were going to find. Now, there are all sorts of reasons that a reptile would be a dinosaur versus a non-dinosaur. But let me show you the one that's the easiest. It's not the most important, but it's the easiest and most obvious. You can always tell if you look at a reconstruction of an early reptile whether it was a dinosaur or not by looking at its legs. Because one thing that set dinosaurs apart from other early reptiles is that their legs went straight down from their bodies. Okay? I mean, if you didn't see the head here, it almost could be an elephant, right? Whereas in a crocodile, a different kind of reptile, you can see they've got splayed legs that take a right angle turn. And that that's really ubiquitous. The reason this ends up being important, besides that you can use it to tell dinosaurs apart, is what it suggests. Legs under your body mean you're built for sustained movement and sustained rapid movement. Reptiles with splayed legs can move very quickly sometimes, but only for like 10 feet. And then they run out of steam because it takes a lot of energy to run if your legs are splayed. So, well, this suggests that dinosaurs were built for speed and were active. Just to continue with this for a minute. So if you look at this sauropod here, here's another example just to show you, see, dinosaur legs were just like mammal legs, straight down from the body. This is a Eutyrannus, an early theropod from China, heavily feathered, partial beak, and legs going straight down from its body. So very nice dinosaur. Okay, so dinosaurs are a specific order of early reptiles. Let's trace bird evolution starting from reptiles and then going kind of generic reptiles and then going to dinosaurs. I'm a very linear thinking. I have to start from the beginning. Um, Dinosaurs are a type of reptile. Reptiles were a huge advancement over what had been around before. What had been around before were amphibians, and amphibians have the problem that they lay their eggs in water, which, if you live in a really wet, marshy place, isn't really much of a problem. But what happened was, because of plate tectonics and the resulting climate change, basically all the continents smashed together, and you had one big supercontinent. Whenever you have a big, big continent, you get a desert in the middle of it. I mean, think about the Sahara, think about the Mongolian desert, think about the middle, the west of the United States. You tend to be wet along coasts and dry in the middle. So when all the continents smashed together, basically most of the landmass was now much, much drier than it had ever been. So there was, I mean, Mother Nature hates a vacuum, hates empty niches. And so there was really pressure for reptiles or something like reptiles to evolve. So, arguably, the oldest reptile we know about is this guy, Hylonomus, 8 inches long, an insectivore, see the splayed legs. But he was the first amniot. He could lay an egg like those python eggs that didn't need to be submerged in water because they were watertight. So 315 million years ago or so, you had the first reptile evolve. And Hylonomus is an example of a stem reptile, the very earliest reptiles that evolve. But very, very quickly in evolutionary time, they diversified. Again, there was this huge landmass with basically no vertebrates on it. So there was room for species to expand. So there was rapid radial evolution. And very, very quickly, there were three suborders of reptiles that evolved. Now, the one we care most about today, because it's the line that leads to birds, are these guys over here, the archosaurs. In 5 million years, you go from stem reptiles to archosaurs. Archosaurs, further over more time, evolved into different types of beings. The first of which to evolve were turtles. Turtles are even older than dinosaurs were. Then dinosaurs and crocodilians at about the same time, and then dinosaurs, of course, would later on evolve into birds. Also pterosaurs or pterodactyls, if you prefer that name, those flying reptiles. And then plesiosaurs. Plesiosaurs are aquatic, generally ocean living reptiles that basically look like the Loch Ness monster. If you can envision something you probably thought was a dinosaur, but it looks like the Loch Ness monster and lives in the water, that's a plesiosaur. So one thing I'm telling you on the slide here is that birds are more closely related to turtles and crocodilians than the type of reptile missing, or the types of reptiles missing from this slide that were not archosaurs. So let's talk about those next. Okay, so the second suborder I just want to briefly mention are lepidosaurs, a little bit newer, not much newer, but a little bit newer than archosaurs. If archosaurs became dinosaurs who eventually became birds, Lepidosaurs became lizards who eventually became snakes. And I think it's kind of cool to see that lizards are actually newer than dinosaurs and snakes are actually newer than birds, because a lot of us still have that great ladder of evolution in our head. The more similar to us, clearly the newer they must be, but it's not true. So I say this in part because a lot of people still think of dinosaurs as giant lizards. You're really better off thinking of them as crocodiles than you are thinking of them as lizards. Lizards differ from dinosaurs in three ways. So let me just do that. Okay, first off, here's a hadrosaur, here's a dinosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur, and you can see it's not only feathered, but it's got those legs going straight down, like I talked about, whereas here is a bearded lizard, an extant living bearded lizard, and you can see bearded dragon, and you can see it's got the classic splayed legs. Secondly, the scales are entirely different. Um, this is a snake. I don't remember which one. A snake scale. Lizard scales look a lot like this. Um, Lizards and snake scales are true scales. To be correct and technical, if you call something a scale, it arises from very high up. It actually arises in the epidermis, high up in the skin. Plus, when you shed it, when the animal sheds it, it comes off in large pieces. So think about, you've all seen, I'm sure, snake skins. When the snake sheds, like the whole skin comes off at once. Over here, we've got some fossilized dinosaur skin. And if you didn't know that, you probably would have thought it was probably crocodile. They actually don't have scales. They have scutes. I said they had scales before because I didn't think you'd know the word scoot until I talked about it. A scoot superficially resembles a scale, but it comes from much deeper down in the skin. It comes from way down in the dermis. And sometimes they even include bone. But when they shed individually. So dinosaurs and archosaurs had scutes, lepidosaurs had scales. And again, here is an alligator, and you can see the scutes, and actually birds on their head tend to have scutes, not scales, which is not like lizards at all. Now, close your eyes if you're easily offended. I'll do the next say that lizards and lepidus had two penises. There you go. And that now you can look if you closed your eyes. That snakes and lizards have two penises. So did lepidosaurs, from the best we can tell from both the fossil and the DNA record. And so that again is very, very different. So again, lizards are not dinosaurs. That's my point. Lizards are not closely related to birds. That's my other point. Finally, just because I'm a real complete freak, let's talk about the third group, the third suborder of reptiles that lived a long time ago, the synapsids. Synapsids are the reptiles that eventually evolved into mammals. This is Dimetrodon, the 280 million years ago, older than the dinosaurs. Uh, in general, the synapsids evolved a little bit earlier than the archosaurs did. This is the line that led to mammals. They were all most interesting thing I can think of when I think about Dimetrodon and his kin is that they were already nocturnal. Kind of the most normal thing for a mammal to be is nocturnal. They're far more nocturnal and at least crepuscular mammals than there are diurnal mammals. And the early reptiles that evolved into mammals were nocturnal. We think because of characteristics of their eyes. And note, it still has splayed legs. It doesn't have yet the legs that go under the body. And just because people are always asking me this, like, how do you know? How do you know what something came from? How do you know what it evolved into? Just as an example, it's very easy to tell early synapsids from sauropsids, which are both archosaurs plus lepidosaurs, simply because synapsids here's their eye socket, have one hole, one fenestra behind their eye socket, where all the sauropsids have two. So it's really easy if you know what you're doing to look at a skeleton, if you've got a skull and say, oh, it's a synapsid or not. Okay. And again, a little bit of a digression, but I have to do this. I want to talk about early mammals. So they arose from synapsids, a group of reptiles even older than the archosaurs, the beginning of the Triassic. They're older than birds, about as old as dinos. My big point is that they coexisted with dinosaurs for more than 150 million years. I say this again because when I talk to people, a lot of people think that a good part of the reason that dinosaurs disappeared is because mammals outcompeted them. No, they did not. Mammals had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that dinosaurs disappeared. In fact, um, before dinosaurs before dinosaurs really were dinosaurs, in the very, very beginning, synapsids and early mammals were much bigger and much more dominant and much more diverse than they were once dinosaurs came into their own. The dinosaurs squashed the mammals, not vice versa. The mammals that lived in the age of dinosaurs were all like this guy. They looked like rats or shrews or mice, and they made their living by being what I like to call sneaky little buggers, because they basically kept out of dinosaurs' way. They were arboreal or they burrowed underground. They were nocturnal. I mean, think Templeton the rat and Charlotte's Web. I mean, they would steal eggs, they'd go out and catch insects, but they in no way bothered the dinosaurs. And so they certainly didn't have anything to do with their extinction. Okay. And then again, mammals came into their own once dinosaurs were extinct. Okay, so which dinosaurs evolved into birds? Well, first we've got dinosaurs, and then you can divide dinosaurs in half. Why do I have that? I have that because if I say there are two types of dinosaurs, I think what comes to mind is you've got your kind of your bipedal meat eaters and you've got your quadruped herbivores, and that's how you divide them in two, but it's not correct. The two suborders of dinosaurs has to do with the structure of their hips. So you've got saurischians, which means lizard-hipped, and your two-legged predatory dinosaurs are in there, as are the Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus type sauropods. And then you've got ornithischian or bird-hipped dinosaurs, which would be the duck-billed dinosaurs, and things like Stegosaurus. Don't need to go into what the bones are doing, but you can see their pelvises are shaped very, very differently. Well, if I didn't seem like a tricky person and I asked you, so which do you think evolved into birds, the Saurischians or the Ornithischians? Which means bird pelvis, you'd all say, oh, the ornithischians, except that would be wrong. It turns out that it was the Saurischian dinosaurs that evolved into birds, and only later, well along the evolutionary path to birds, did their pelvises change and become like modern bird pelvises. So it's going to be Saurischian dinosaurs that are going to evolve into birds. Well, which Saurischian dinosaurs? There's a really easy answer to this one. Theropods. That's an Allosaurus, by the way. Um, let's see. What do I want to say about theropods? Well, when you think about the two-legged meat-eating dinosaurs, the bipedal meat-eating dinosaurs, Allosaurus, T-Rex, Spinosaurus, uh, Velociraptor, those are all theropods. Theropods were a family of dinosaurs. Okay, so think on the level of a family. And this is what everybody thinks of. I mean, when you think theropod, you think about T-Rexes and Velociraptors because they're the ones that feature in all the movies. Plus, we've known about them a really long time. However, whoops, did I skip that? Yeah. There were I want to say this. Okay, the problem is that not all theropods looked like that. Those are the only ones we think of, but there were a lot of theropods that looked a lot more like this. And it's a lot easier to believe that birds evolved from theropods and from dinosaurs if you understand that there were a heck of a lot of theropods that looked more like this than looked like this. And now we even know that these guys were largely feathered. So again, theropods are a family. A family would be something like cuckoos or swifts. Theropods were very successful dinosaurs. They're about the oldest family of dinosaur that there is, and they lived the whole time that dinosaurs were around, at least except for that very beginning. They were the most common dinosaurs. We know about more than 1,000 species of theropods, and again, a lot of them look like this. And that's more than any other type of dinosaur. They ranged in size from 3 inches to about 50 feet long. And though they started off as being carnivores, by the end, some of them were not. So birds evolved from theropods. And even from the type so theropods are the type of dinosaur that T-Rex was. But again, you've got to remember there are all these other guys that are a lot smaller and a lot more bird-like that were good theropods too. Oh, and for example, Zeatingia. I mean, if you saw that, I think it's very easy to imagine that something that looked like this could evolve into a bird someday. And that's a nice theropod. Now, what birds did not evolve from, because a lot of people think this, are pterodons or pterosaurs or pterodactyls, whatever word you like to use, name you like to use. These were the ones that had the wings that stretched on their pinky finger. Um, Pterosaurs also evolved from archosaurs, just like dinosaurs did, but they are not dinosaurs. They differ in lots and lots of ways, though they seem superficially more bird-like than a lot of dinosaurs in that they've got wings. Many of them had hard toothless beaks. But these are not dinosaurs. Birds did not evolve from them. So I'm just telling you that so that you make sure you're not confused about that. Okay, here's a picture of one. Another interesting thing is that many of them were feathered. Um, Many of them had these crests. They had very bizarre wings. And look at that. Here's the finger sticking up. He's resting on his hands. Feathers, which you could talk about easily for an hour all by themselves, are very, very interesting. They evolved multiple times or very, very, very early, because you find them in a whole variety of creatures. Okay. We talked about a whole bunch of ways, 6 ways that birds are similar to dinosaurs. Let me just do some more. Theropod dinosaurs were almost certainly warm-blooded. Maybe not quite as warm-blooded as we are, and then maybe again, yes, as warm-blooded as we are. And we know that for all sorts of reasons. I always like it when there's lots of converging evidence about things. So for example, cold-blooded animals, if you look, basically, if you look at predator to prey ratio, it's about 1 to 1. A really nice thing about being a cold-blooded animal is you don't have to eat a lot. So, because you don't have to eat a lot, there can be as many predators as there are prey. If you look today, Cenozoic animals, the predator-prey ratio is about 1 to 10. Because they're warm-blooded, they need a lot more food. If you look at dinosaurs, if you look at you find the carnivore to herbivore ratio is also 1 to 10. So they've got the right ratio. Another thing you might not know about dinosaurs is that they lived in Antarctica. Not all of them, obviously, but there were lots of dinosaurs, including lots of theropods that lived in Antarctica. And granted, Antarctica wasn't as cold back when they lived there as it is today. It was like being in northern Canada. So very hard for a cold-blooded creature to survive, and they couldn't have just slept through the winters because their young took so long to grow. I mean, couldn't have happened. So we know at least some of them were warm-blooded. Again, the fact that their legs are under their body suggests that they're warm-blooded and active. It's not important, but it's really interesting when you look at their egg colors, because you can do biochemical analyses and figure out what color eggs were. Bird eggs don't come in every color of the rainbow, right? They're mostly kind of cream or cream speckled with brown, and then there's a bluish green. They're not pink, they're not purple, they're not bright yellow. Dinosaurs have the exact same range of colors. Their eggs, they had expanded vision and memory lobes in the brain, not as much as birds, but on their way there, 3 toes. And then there's all sorts of behavioral ways that dinosaurs were similar to birds. For one thing, many dinosaurs were, if you talk about birds, highly social. When you think about birds, of course, we know that birds, some species of birds will form enormous flocks. That was also true of dinosaurs. Again, some species of dinosaurs. We know this because they've left footprints. And also you find mass burial sites, but just think about footprints. If you can see that, 75 individuals walked through here with different strides and different feet and different scars on the bottom of their feet. So we know that at least some of them were highly social. Some of them also exhibited brooding behavior, just like a bird, as you know, that when birds are on the nest, the bird, the parent, often the female, climbs on top, carefully places her feet, spreads her wings out to form insulation in a very definite posture. Well, this is a theropod. There are its eggs. And you can see it's doing the exact same thing. There have been a number of fossils found like that. Also, sleeping position. Many birds, not all, but many birds have this characteristic head tucked under wing sleeping position. Here's an example of a theropod dinosaur sleeping the exact same way. Okay, I don't remember what species this is, but it is a theropod. And their wings were smaller, so it didn't quite cover its face, but it's got the same tucked up position. So there are lots and lots of ways that birds and dinosaurs, behaviorally were really very similar. Now, don't faint at the next slide. I don't expect you to remember all but a little of it, but I wanted to make a point. If you look at the order in which bird-like traits evolved, look at the top line, feathers, legs, underbody, and bipedal. Anything with brown, so that's the top line, were characteristics widespread across the dinosaurs, even dinosaurs that are not closely related to birds. Then you got the middle two lines, hollow bones, wishbone, three-fingered hand, bird pelvis, flight, pygostyle. I have to change that. That should be brown. And these were characteristics of theropod dinosaurs. And it isn't until you get down to the third row, the bottom row here in gold, clawless wings, keeled sternum, and completely toothless beak, that you get to modern birds. So there are a lot, birds share more traits with classic dinosaurs than they don't. Basically what it boils down to. Now, let me just go back and talk about some of these. So wishbone. We've all played the wishbone game with our Thanksgiving turkey when we were kids, but I don't know if you've ever thought about it. What is a wishbone? A wishbone is a fused clavicle. Here's a human skeleton, and the green are the two clavicles. You can feel that notch at the base of your throat. Our clavicles don't meet. Birds have two fused clavicles. And the reason this trait evolved is because flying requires a lot of strength, a lot of force to lift a bird off the ground. And having a fused clavicle is biomechanically a lot stronger than two separate clavicles. And so that's why birds have a wishbone, if you ever wondered. Another thing birds have is what's called a pygostyle. This is a microraptor. This is a dinosaur, not a bird. And you can see that it still has a long tail, has many bird-like features, but it has a long bony tail. Birds, even if they appear to have a long tail, like this rooster, they really don't. What they have is this tiny, like it's 5 to 7 vertebrae instead of, 18 or 20 vertebrae. They usually curve up like this, an upward comma. And then what you're really seeing are a lot of tail feathers coming off of it. This weighs a lot less than this does. And then finally, a keeled sternum. Again, unless you've been vegetarian for a long time, I'm sure you can think about what a chicken breast looks like when you eat it. That is a chicken there on the left. The breastbone has this huge outward projecting sternum. In contrast, here's a dog sternum, the dog skeleton with its flat sternum. We, of course, have a flat sternum. But birds have a keeled sternum. Looks like a keel of a ship. It's much larger, it's much deeper. And that's because, again, flight muscles have to be really big. And in order for muscles to work, They have to have bone to attach to, and our flat sternums simply don't give enough surface area for large enough muscles for flight. So those are some of the characteristics that modern birds have. Okay, the path from dinos to birds. In a very short way, because I do it longer in other lectures. I guess really what I wanted to say here is that, first off, birds did coexist with dinosaurs for about half of the time the classic dinosaurs were around. Really, though some birds lost that ability and specialized to do other things, the thing that made a bird is that they were becoming more and more evolved for flying. And I'll talk about what that means uh, later. But in general, birds were better flyers than dinosaurs were. Now, there also were what I call half and halves or chimera creatures, because when a trait is evolving, so this is the evolution of a horse, and you go from Eohippus all the way to Equus, the modern horse. I mean, if what's happening, for example, is that you're developing a hoof, it happens gradually. Some traits change gradually, and there's no good metric for when it's good enough, hoof-like enough to call it a hoof. So everybody would agree that this is a horse. Is this a horse? I think probably a lot of you would say yes. Is this a horse? I don't know. I'm not sure. Some of you would say yes, some of you would say no. So what I'm trying to say is the skies were very full during the age of dinosaurs. There not only were pterosaurs, but there were dinosaurs that flew. There were these half and half creatures that are halfway to becoming birds around, and there were also true birds around. And so you can find traits that are kind of all halfway between. And then there were creatures like this. These really are my chimeras. I call this my owl cat because if I had a show of hands, if we were live and I said you have to pick, it's either a cat or an owl, I think we'd get a pretty much a 50-50 split because it's got feathers and wings and a beak that makes it an owl, but it's got fur and a tail and four legs, which and cat ears, which kind of makes it a cat. There were a lot of creatures that had really classic dinosaur features and some other features that were really, really modern bird-like in the same animal. Um, and so what do you call that, right? There's no metric for it. You have to kind of use your best judgment, and the scientists don't always agree. But in general, how do you get to a bird? The way you get to a bird is that bones get smaller and thinner. The bony tail is reduced to a stump with feathers instead of giving it its length, not bone. The teeth are lost and replaced by a horny beak, and in general, you're smaller. Um, Another thing that happens is that the arms and chest become modified. Basically, you get stronger arms and shoulders. Think about us. Our legs are longer, they're bigger and stronger than our arms. In birds, that's not true. In most birds, their arms, their wings, and shoulders are stronger than their legs and hips. You get the wishbone and keeled sternum I was talking about. And again, difference in size of the legs and arms. Feathers also improved. Um, Feathers did not evolve for flight. That's another lecture, the evolution of flight. But feathers did not evolve for flight. The reason we know that is they evolved way, 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 way before flight was around. Plus, there are all sorts of animals like saurischians, like the brontosaurus like animals that were feathered, triceratops like animals that were feathered. These guys were not flying. And so the consensus is that feathers evolved first for warmth probably, and then secondarily for sexual display. Look at me, I'm a gorgeous male. um, Here's a dinosaur skeleton, and you can see it's got feathers. Um, but they're all different types of feathers. We used to think that dinosaurs didn't have number 7 here, a contour feather, which is considered the most advanced feather. But now, in the past 10 years, they found a bunch of dinosaurs that do have contour feathers. So dinosaurs had all the same kind of feathers that birds do. And again, not just the ones closely related to dinosaurs. This is another one of the hadrosaurs, a bird hip dinosaur, so as far away from true birds as you can get, and they were pretty heavily feathered. This is called Kai Hang Jui. Uh, I showed him because this is the correct coloration. So we know that birds not only sometimes and really well preserved feather impressions. So really long feathers, really thick feathers, and even iridescent feathers for decoration, like hummingbirds that are really bright and iridescent. This is a microraptor, just showing you another one that not only has really well-developed feathers. This is a dinosaur. This isn't even a half and half, but it actually had four wings. It had wings on its legs as well as on its arms. Okay, I'm going to skip the next bit because I've got now. I just finished a whole new lecture about the evolution of flight, but I just wanted to say that why did flight evolve? What's good about it, or what was the process? One theory is called cursorial theory, which means if you run and you use your wings for lift, you can maybe jump onto a ledge that you wouldn't have been able to jump or get away from the jaws of a predator. The opposite, called arboreal theory, is that you start up high and float down like a brown creeper. They climb up trees and glide down, and eventually, so at first they kind of just gently fell, but then they flapped and started flying distances. And then the newest theory is called wing-assisted inclined running, which means that you can flap your wings and run up very, very steep slopes. But I can talk. I talk about the evidence to that in another lecture now. Um, Early birds in the age of dinosaurs. Arguably, the oldest bird we know about, there's not consensus about this. Some people do not consider it a bird, is called Aronish Zui. That's why I've got an asterisk there, the first two bird. The name means dawn bird, 160 million years old. It was totally covered in downy feathers, except on its wings, which had better feathers, but it couldn't fly. It had teeth, pheasant-sized. And again, some paleontologists call this a bird, some do not. Classically, for 100 years, what's been considered the first bird is this guy, Archaeopteryx. Very, very important fossil find. The reason he was so important, and there's 12 really beautiful specimens just like this, was because it was discovered right after Darwin published his theory of evolution. And it was seen as evidence that, yes, look, you've got transitional creatures that are going from dinosaur to bird in this case. It's got a lot of classic dinosaur features, but it's heavily feathered, clearly halfway to becoming a bird. And so it was considered really good evidence for Darwin's theory. And it's actually questionable whether his theory would have been as successful and as widely accepted if it had not been for this find. But to burst the bubble, if it were found nowadays, there's no doubt it would be called a dinosaur, not a bird. It's got too many dinosaur traits. Well, this is what it looked like. This is the correct coloration. It was colored like a magpie. But this is hot off the presses. This bird was discovered less than a year ago. It is now considered by consensus, well, if it's not Oronus, then it's this. Viminornis is the oldest undisputed bird. It was discovered last February. It's about the same age as Archaeopteryx, but nobody doubts that this is a true bird. So we do know that there were true birds 150 million years ago. Now, just to tell you, the most birds were really, 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 really common during the age of dinosaurs, and most of them belonged to a family called Enantiorniths, which completely died out during the cataclysm that killed, all the classic dinosaurs. They were not directly related to modern birds. We know that because the name Enantiornith means backward shoulder. Their shoulder joints are completely different. But these were everywhere. I mean, just go into the woods. These were mostly woodland birds, but go into the woods. Think woodpeckers, think passerines. Just they were everywhere. They were just so numerous. And I like that picture of them. Well, then the classic dinosaurs died out. And the classic dinosaurs died out because a huge meteor, 4 miles in diameter, struck the Earth. It left a crater more than 100 miles in diameter. It was 2 million times as powerful as our current best atomic weapon. It didn't just kill off the dinosaurs, it killed off 80% of all sea life and 80% of all land life. basically anything larger than a house cat on land died off, um, because there were shock waves, earthquakes, tidal waves, the heat flash and the force of the explosion. The heat set every single, that's not an exaggeration, every single forest on the planet on fire. They all burned down, so no forest species survived, which is why the Enantiodonts all died out. And then after that, the seas acidified because of all the sulfur dioxide that got spewed into the air. And then you had nuclear winter because of the dust. And nobody knows how long it lasted, but it lasted long enough for all the plant life to die off, or almost all the plant life to die off. All the big plants certainly died off. No trees, no bushes. Um, and so, yes, dinosaurs died off, as did, like I said, 80% of all the species of life on the planet. Very few things managed to survive. And most of the things that did survive were either cold-blooded animals, because cold-blooded animals have a real advantage over warm-blooded animals when there's no food. When there's a nuclear winter and there's no plants to eat, the herbivores die. And then a little bit later on, all the predators die because there's no food for them. They start eating each other, and then there are none left. But if you're cold-blooded and you don't need to eat very often, you've got a real advantage to that. Animals that lived in caves or underground or deep in the ocean were more likely to survive. Or flying creatures, because they move really fast and can cover large distances. And so the ancestors of our modern birds survived. But it's not, I'm trying to say, it's not that dinosaurs were particularly vulnerable. T-Rex was not going to get out of this alive, being as big as he was. And I'm going to probably have to skip, darn it, the next part of this talk. I've been talking about how bird-like dinosaurs are. I was going to talk about how dinosaur-like, how bird-like some dinosaurs were by talking about a type of bird called terror bird, which were the dominant predators in South America, especially uh, after the age of dinosaurs. South America was an island, and there were no mammals there survived, no large mammals survived the cataclysm. And so terror birds evolved, and some of them straggled on and lived till about 12,000 years ago, and they coexisted with humans. And there's some evidence, like finger bones in their bellies, that they either attacked or at least scavenged human corpses. And they did really, really well when South America was an island. But though they were really, really scary when the oceans receded, and there's now a land bridge between North and South America, they were scary. But saber-toothed cats and dire wolves were even scarier. And so they ended up dying out. But that's a very short summary of what I was going to say. These are just some examples of scary modern birds. But let me just get to my last slide. Here's my last slide. You know, we say we went from the age of dinosaurs to the age of mammals, but I want you to think about this. Right now on Earth, there are more than 10,000 species of birds, whereas there's only 5,400 species, 5,400, give or take, species of mammals. There are 200 to 400 billion individual birds and only 130 billion individual mammals. Birds range from less than a tenth of an ounce to over 300 pounds. And they live everywhere. They live in swamps, they live in deserts, they live in jungles, they live all through the ocean. They live in the Antarctic and the Arctic and, prairies. They live everywhere. So I would tell you that, no, I'm missing a slide I thought I had, sorry, that dinosaurs really still are amongst us. They're just smaller and more feathered than you might have imagined, and they're still really, really successful. And that's the end of my talk. So I'm done. Thank you. So I'll stop sharing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was fascinating.
I love dinos.
There's a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll see if we can get through those. But I think that some people might want you to actually go back and explain a little bit more about the terror birds, because that actually looks really interesting. But if everybody whose video is on can just give me a nod if you want to hear a little bit about terror birds, and you can give us like 5 minutes of that. Yes,
Oh, no, I
everybody.
wasn't going to give you 5 minutes. I really said all the key things. I mean, when dinosaurs died out, the big dinosaurs died out, again, Mother Nature hates a vacuum. You now have all these empty niches around. And so what fills them? And what filled them was different in different places. But in South America, because sea levels had risen, because it was warmer and the glaciers melted, and so there was no Central America, South America was an island. And because it was an island, it happened to be an island where all the large mammals died off too. So again, it wasn't just dinosaurs that were vulnerable, it was any large animal. So the large cats that had been here, the bears that had been there, they all died out. And so some birds got there because birds can fly. They don't necessarily need a land bridge. And over time, they evolved and they got really, some of them got really, really huge. Think twice the size of an ostrich. I mean, there were a number of different terror bird species, but the biggest ones were, 10 feet tall and weighed way over, like 3 or 4 times the size of an ostrich. If you know about elephant birds, they weren't as heavy as elephant birds, but they were taller than elephant birds. And what they had, the way they killed things, is they had these enormous beaks. And they would basically, and they were really fast. They didn't fly, they were flightless. They were way too heavy, like an ostrich, to fly. And what they would do is they would run down prey and then it would be like taking a pickaxe and they'd go right through the skull. They went for the back of the head. And, just their beak would dig in, right into the brain, and that was it. And they lived a really long time. They lived like I think it's like 40 million years. I mean, they were there a long time. But eventually the oceans receded as the world got colder again, and Central America came up. And actually, the direction went both ways. Some terror birds migrated into North America. They got as far as Florida, for example, and into Texas. But they didn't last long because, as I said, they were scary and dangerous, but so were saber-toothed cats, and giant cave lions and bears and dire wolves. And you can see it because the dire wolves and the cats are moving down, the terror birds are moving up. And wherever they cross, you start seeing the terror bird populations go down. I mean, you can just like trade off. The more wolves, the fewer terror birds. I mean, you can see exactly what's happening by the numbers. And they just got outcompeted by these really good mammalian predators. Um, but there are still some pretty scary birds alive today. Probably the most dangerous bird is the cassowary. I didn't stop to show it, but there was a cassowary foot there. I used to live in New Zealand, and so I'd go to Australia all the time. And if you walk in the rainforest in Australia, you really worry about running into a cassowary because they're aggressive and their feet are about this long, and they've got huge claws, and you don't want to run into one. And then there are storkbill, blank blank storks, shoebill storks that have also these really enormous beaks, kind of similar, though not as heavy as the terror bird beak. And and there were other really large birds that weren't predators. So, for example, in Europe, there were birds almost as big that were vegetarian. So birds filled initially after the dinosaurs died out. I mean, it took some time, but they eventually, many of them grew very, very large and filled the niches that were empty because the dinosaurs were gone. And then they were eventually outcompeted by mammals. The big ones were. Not the little ones that fly, but the big ones that didn't were basically outcompeted by mammals eventually. How's that?
Fascinating. That's a great summary. I was gonna say, if you're a human, cassowaries might be the most scary, but if you're a smaller creature, I feel like a shrike. Shrikes that like they stab all
Yeah,
the
they'd be
prey
bad
along
too.
everything. It's kind
I
of
just
scary.
know that I was never worried about running into a shrike. Not that shrikes live
It's
in
true, it's
Australia,
true.
but
Yeah,
you
as a
really
larger
did.
creature.
If you saw fresh cassowary scat, you'd find another trail.
So some of the questions that we've got in the chat, I don't know if we're gonna be able to cover all of them. Somebody asked well, one of the many Susan Prescotts of this meeting asked, were terror birds classified as birds?
Oh, absolutely.
So
True birds,
they're
no doubt about it.
anatomically modern birds, yeah.
Oh, anatomically modern birds.
Okay.
Absolutely. You probably, if you didn't see its head, which was different, you'd think it was a large ostrich. And-
Okay. And the follow-up question there is which ancestors of birds survived if all the Enantiornis died out?
Okay, I've got a whole lecture on that, but this is really cool. I mean, the short answer is, and again, when I talk to people, I think most people think of passerines as being kind of your prototypical bird. It must have been a passerine that then, evolved and became all these other birds that we have, but it wasn't. The absolute oldest modern bird that actually lived during the time of dinosaurs, they coexisted with dinosaurs, were chickens.
Aha!
The
The
answer
mighty
is
chicken.
chickens. And then after chickens, the answer is ducks. And everything else evolved from them that we know about. Well, not ostriches, not the paleonates, but it wasn't passerines. Passerines are everything. Once the cataclysm happened after 66 million years ago, birds diversified very quickly, but passerines were among the last of the birds to differentiate.
So I think that you're going to be in high demand. We might need to have you come back next for the next program season to get the talk on everything that you didn't cover today. Some
Didn't get to. There were actually, I should also say, the birds that lived with when dinosaurs were around, there were birds that there were the Enantiornis, which were the most numerous and had the most niches, but there were two other types of bird. One was in effect a seagull. Okay, it was a toothed seagull. If you would see it, you would think it was a seagull, except it had teeth. Okay, and there was another type of bird that was kind of halfway between a loon and a penguin that dominated the oceans. In fact, they were the only dinosaurs that ever successfully, because birds are dinosaurs, really colonized the ocean. I mean, they because penguins are stuck in really cold places. These Hesperonychs, or the birds I'm talking about, were very widespread and very numerous, and so kind of a cross between a loon and a penguin.
Fascinating. One of the other questions that got asked twice is, do female lepidosaurs have two vaginas?
No, they don't, but
Okay.
they have very complicated ones.
Okay. Seems like
Okay.
a hard
Well,
topic
I
to
actually
dive
shouldn't even
into.
say that because they have cloacas rather than vaginas anyway, but they don't have two of them.
Okay.
Mhm.
Another question, how do we see your other lectures?
Well, you can invite me back next year.
We're gonna have to do
The
that.
one I'm really excited to give is actually the one on the evolution of flight because I just finished it, just worked that up. How you go from an arm to a wing and how you go from a strong running leg and what kind of forces do you need to fly and how did it all work? And so anyway, but I've also got one on the birds that lived during the age of dinosaurs, and then I've got one on bird evolution right after the dinosaurs became extinct. So some of them are on our webpage, I think, the South Sound webpage. I don't know how long we keep um, talks. They were up for like a year. I don't know if they're still up because I gave them a couple of years ago at South Sound.
I'll look for those when we're done, and maybe we'll be able to send them if I do find them. Um, why did we? Oh, this was one of my questions. Why did we not know that dinosaurs had feathers until relatively recently?
Okay. Because they don't fossilize nearly as well as bones do. Soft tissue. I mean, they're not quite soft tissue, but think about it. They're very fragile, delicate things compared to bones. The short answer is actually because China got into paleontology. Most of the important finds in the last 15 years have been in China because in order to preserve, if not just feathers, but very bird-like dinosaurs or those half and half creatures that, are no bigger than the palm of my hand and covered with feathers, you need a very, very specific kind of event to fossilize them. You need very, very fine silt that covers the bird quickly, but not so quickly as to scatter things and all that. And China happens to have two or three beds that are just perfect. And so there've probably been 40 or 50 either halfway creatures or birds discovered in China in the past 15 years. And they didn't used to do paleontology. So I think that's why. And that's why bird evolution is less understood than a lot of other creatures, because again, small bird bones just don't preserve very well.
That's yeah, I would have never guessed that that was the correct answer there. That was the answer for
Mhm.
that China got involved in paleontology.
And China got involved in paleontology.
What is the well, this is kind of a bigger question. What is the selective advantage of feathers?
Well, originally for warmth, I think, because there are a whole bunch of dinosaur species where only the babies are feathered. Uh, and then or they have less feathers as they grow up, so they're totally downy covered feathers, think baby chicks when they're babies, and then maybe they only have feathers on their wings and a crest on their head when they're adults. And so that's that's how they evolved. Like I said, they evolved many times and they evolved way, way, way before something could even think about flying.
All right, another quicker question. How do you spell scutes, the non-scales?
Oh, Scutes.
S-C-U S-C-U-T-E-S. Okay. I'm actually going to
Yes.
reply that in
Mhm.
case that person doesn't think.
Mhm.
Scoots. Um, I have another question myself, but I'm going to skip those since there are so many different theropods. Since there are many different theropods, did different modern bird
Yeah.
families evolve from different ones specifically? Raptors, songbirds, shorebirds, etc.
No, no. The birds that we have nowadays evolved from, that's a really hard question. Let me think about how I want to answer this.
I think it depends on how far back you go.
It depends on how far back you go is part of it. But most of the birds that there was a point in time before the classic dinosaurs disappeared where there were birds that came from different lines of theropods, okay? But they virtually all died out 66 million years ago. So the modern birds we have today came from a very small number of birds that survived that big extinction event.
Okay.
Does that answer the
I
question?
think that answers it most, that most modern birds evolved from a smaller group that was within.
Yeah.
And so was there a specific advantage evolutionary advantage that that group had that allowed them to then diverge? Was it the
Well,
presence of a beak? Was
yeah,
it being
yeah.
small?
Who survived the cataclysm? Okay. Again, if you were a forest-dwelling bird, kiss it goodbye. Okay. Just kiss it goodbye. Because there was no food for so long, anything that ate anything like a fruit or a leaf or, a blade of grass didn't make it. What food survives when no plants can grow? The answer is seeds, because seeds can hang around an incredibly long period of time, and insects that live underground.
Hmm.
And so the reason some birds, this is all probable, this is what people think, there's no proof for it. The reason people think that the birds that survived did were because they were seed eaters and not in the forest and ate bugs. That's why mammals did okay, because mammals generally live in burrows, or many mammals live in burrows. Birds that were um, uh, shorebirds and water birds did better, and creatures in general on the surface that could dive did better. Um, but basically, you had to be a small seed eater, or you had to be cold-blooded, which no birds were.
And then somebody's following up. The birds that survived were the ancestors of theropods, weren't they?
Oh, no, no, theropods came before birds.
Yeah.
I mean, classic theropods came before
Or
birds.
so I guess the question is probably the not the ancestors, the progeny.
Yes, it's very clear that birds came from several different lines of theropods, but most of those died out.
Okay.
Okay. Really, I mean, you have to understand everything's very hesitant because, well, for two reasons. One is we know that the fossil record is incredibly spotty for birds because birds don't fossilize well. Two, besides fossils, there's another kind of evidence that people who like to look at the evolution of things use, and that's called a molecular clock. You can look to see when groups diverged from each other by how different pieces of their DNA are. And they don't always give you quite the same answer. But I mean, here, let me give you an example. One group of birds that must have survived, but we have absolutely no fossils for them, are the paleonates. Paleonates are birds like ostriches and rheas and cassowaries. They have a very different, the word paleonate means old jaw, though it's not really their jaw, it's the roof of their mouth. That's just like classic dinosaurs had. Modern birds, neonates, you've probably all heard neonates, neonates, um, have a very different structure to the top of their jaw, and nobody thinks birds went backwards. So there had to be paleonates, true paleonates birds before the cataclysm, and they must have survived the cataclysm, though we don't have very any early examples of them.
That's I
So that you have to, we're dealing with a very spotty fossil record.
that's tends to be the case with everything. Fossil record, the only things that survive are going to be in the perfect conditions for surviving. Um,
Yeah,
I have another question here, which is, will we get the recording? The recording that I took, which, as you all probably noticed, I started halfway through the title slide, so it's not going to be complete at the beginning there, but I'll be uploading that to YouTube, and I'll have a link to that on our webpage. If you go to our YouTube channel, which is just Whidbey Audubon Society, you can see all of the recordings of previous um, program meetings that we've had before. But if anybody has any other questions that they would like to throw in, you could just raise your hand or you could just unmute your mic if anybody has any last minute questions before we say goodbye, because this was really, truly a fascinating presentation.
I hope you all feel you learned something.
All right, we got one hand raised here.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask one more question really specifically about great blue herons, because there was a
Sure.
theropod that looked like exactly like a great blue heron, and I'm just curious
Right.
if there's anything unique about great blue herons or if it's the same.
No, it's just that there's something called convergent evolution, which means that if you're trying to make your living in a certain way, or you've got two unrelated animals or lines of animals that are trying to make their living in the same way, they often evolve traits that are very, very similar because it works. So having long naked legs, if you're a waiter, works whether you're a lizard or you're a dinosaur or you're a bird. So since there were dinosaurs, dinosaurs had every niche that we have now, dinosaurs filled at some point. So if there was a dinosaur that made its living standing in the shallows looking for fish, that kind of a beak and those kind of legs work. Um, and so no, I don't think there's anything special about a great blue heron. I mean, there could have been a picture that something looked exactly like a very well-known fossil called Vegavis, because there are lots and lots and lots of Vegavises. Or another one called Presbyarns look just like geese. They look exactly like geese. They're not geese, but they look exactly like them. If you saw one, you would say that's a species of goose I've never seen before, but it wouldn't occur to you it wasn't a goose. So there are lots of examples like that. There are woodpeckers. Some of the enantiorniths, if you didn't see that they had little teeth in the back of their mouth, look exactly like woodpeckers. And they even had the two-toed, how most birds got three toes up and one toe back, but woodpeckers have two and two. They have the same feet because if you want to climb up a tree, that's the right kind of foot to have. So it's driven by how they make their living.
This question and answer section is blowing my mind. Joe, you got a question?
Yeah, very quick question. Excellent presentation, Kim. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
You indicated that in the modern birds that they had lost the claws on their wings.
Yes, except
I'm
for
wondering,
Hoatzin.
yeah, what about the Hoatzin in South America that has claws on the wings on the fingers as juveniles, but loses them as adults? Are those homologous to the dinosaurians, or are they analogous?
I really don't know the answer to that, but my guess is it's a genetic throwback because they're really exactly like the claws that the enantiomorphs had.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're structurally the same, and they're probably used for the same purpose, which is young birds to be able to climb tree trunks.
Yep.
To escape predators. But that's what I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what an enantiomorph would have had, those tiny little claws right at right there on their wings, except they had them as adults too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe that that's it for questions for now, although I'm sure we could just go on about this for hours and hours. So we'll have to have you come back sometime, hopefully within the
Love to.
next couple of months, maybe. Well,
Maybe even a time I can get to Whidbey Island and someone could take me birding.
yeah, there you
That would be
go.
great.
Yeah, we would love to have you in person or maybe for a hybrid meeting in Coopville or Freeland. I feel like everybody would be really excited about that. But bravo, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So see you all again.
Absolutely.
Enjoy.
Thank you so
So
much.
Bye-bye.
you all probably are going to receive a survey automatically after this meeting is done. So if you do receive that survey, you know what to fill out.
You guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.